To wound the male ego, particularly in the sexual domain, is not to humiliate the man, it is to touch the brittle mask he has been conditioned to wear. The sexual ego is not the self, it is a persona, a fragile scaffolding built upon approval, performance, and fear. From early life, man is taught that his worth is in his virility, in his ability to please, to conquer, to dominate. But this mythology traps him. It binds his sense of identity to function rather than presence, to outcome rather than connection. When a woman dares to disrupt this illusion, not with cruelty but with conscious confrontation, she creates a rupture through which the deeper masculine can emerge. The sexual ego is terrified of inadequacy. It is haunted by the shadow, the hidden parts of himself that whisper he is not enough, not man enough, not strong, not skilled. Yet it is precisely this shadow that must be integrated for love to become sacred rather than performative. The woman who can hold a mirror to this false structure, who can say, with tender fire, "You don't have to impress me, you just have to be real with me," is not hurting him to destroy him. She is initiating him into depth. She is refusing to collude with the lie that performance is intimacy. And in doing so, she opens the door to a deeper, erotic truth. This hurt, then, is sacred. It is not the lashing of contempt, it is the cut of awakening. The man whose ego is lightly pierced in love does not retreat if he is ready, he steps forward. Because underneath the ego's armor is the archetypal man who longs to be known, not for his technique, but for his essence. When the woman challenges the ego and does not abandon the man, she creates a paradoxical experience. She wounds his pride, but loves him still. This is unbearable for the false self and liberating for the true one. The sexual ego, as it manifests in the modern man, is a carefully constructed persona, an image he performs, a mask he wears, often unconsciously, in response to cultural expectations and inherited myths of virility. It is not his self, but a protective shell built upon the need to be desirable, capable, and dominant. From adolescence, he is indoctrinated into a silent narrative, that his worth is measured by performance, that pleasure is proof of power, and that his masculinity must always assert itself. But this is illusion. Beneath this carefully crafted image lies the true self, the vulnerable and yearning soul that does not seek to impress, but to connect. And yet, he rarely reveals it, because to do so would mean facing his deepest fear that without performance, he may be unlovable. This persona, Jung would say, is necessary for social survival, but it becomes dangerous when a man confuses it for his identity. In the sexual realm, it becomes even more precarious because the erotic encounter touches upon the most primal and unconscious layers of the psyche. In that intimate space, the man is not just expressing desire, he is exposing himself, and so the ego rushes in to protect him, to perform the role of the confident lover, the experienced seducer, the unwavering man. But if he believes this role is who he truly is, then he becomes alienated from the depths of his own erotic truth. He becomes trapped in repetition, driven by anxiety rather than presence, by mastery rather than mystery. The persona cannot love, it can only perform, and performance, no matter how refined, lacks soul. It is soul that the feminine seeks, not technique, not bravado, but the presence of the whole man. And yet, to reveal the soul, the man must risk his ego being undone. He must allow the possibility of failure, of not being enough, of being seen in his unguarded rawness. Only then can the deeper masculine emerge, not as a function of dominance, but as a vessel of presence, depth, and sensitivity. This requires courage of the highest order, the courage to be known beyond the persona. When a woman, in the space of intimacy, refuses to collude with the sexual ego, when she does not reward the mask but calls forth the man behind it, she becomes not a threat, but a liberator. Her gaze, if it is grounded in love rather than critique, can dissolve the illusion and summon the real, and it is in this dissolution that the man has a chance to step into authenticity. No longer bound to proving his worth, he can finally offer his presence. This is the erotic as initiation, not a conquest, but a return, not the inflation of ego, but the unveiling of essence. The sexual ego may fear this undoing, but the soul longs for it, because only through this alchemical fire can he be made whole. The ego, particularly the sexual ego in men, is not a sturdy fortress but a fragile construction, propped up by years of conditioning, performance-based identity, and fear of inadequacy. It clings to the illusion of control, thrives on validation, and recoils from exposure. And yet, it is this very ego that must be wounded if the deeper archetypal masculine is ever to awaken. The ego lives on the surface, guarding the man from shame, from rejection, from the chaos of vulnerability. But the archetypal masculine, the king, the warrior, the magician, the lover, resides in the depths, asleep beneath the layers of persona, awaiting a rupture profound enough to stir it into consciousness. That rupture often comes not from grand battles, but from the quiet, shattering moment when a woman sees through the mask and dares to love what lies beneath it. To wound the ego is not to annihilate the man, it is to crack the shell so the self might emerge. The ancient rites of passage were built on this principle. The boy must be broken in order to become a man. His ego must be confronted, his illusions stripped away, his false identity pierced by truth. Only then does the archetypal masculine rise, not in reaction, but in revelation. In the modern world, where such rituals have vanished, it is often in the crucible of intimate relationship that this confrontation takes place. And the feminine, when conscious and rooted, becomes the initiator, not by attacking, but by refusing to worship the mask. She speaks not to the ego's pride, but to the soul's hunger. The ego hears critique and flinches, but the deeper masculine hears truth and remembers. The words that wound the ego, "You don't have to prove anything to me. I want you, not your performance. I feel you hiding," are not weapons, but instruments of awakening. They are keys, not daggers. They open the locked door behind which the man's authenticity waits. If he can withstand the sting of being seen, if he can survive the trembling of his false identity, then something far more powerful begins to stir. The archetype reclaims the throne. He becomes less concerned with dominance and more devoted to presence, less obsessed with control, more attuned to connection. This process is not linear. The ego fights for its survival, resists dissolution, seeks to restore its illusion of mastery. But love that is brave enough to challenge the ego without withdrawing creates a field in which the real man is invited to emerge. Not the man who performs, but the man who feels. Not the one who seduces, but the one who holds. This is the masculine not as image, but as essence, spacious, steady, receptive to the unknown. And paradoxically, it is through the pain of that first wound, the trembling of the small self, that the larger self comes into being. The ego bleeds, but the archetype breathes. The boy retreats, and the man finally arrives. The erotic realm is not a playground for the persona. It is a sacred theater where the unconscious reveals itself through the body, breath, and gaze. It is in this intimate chamber that the shadow, the repressed, the denied, the unloved parts of the self emerges with greatest force. The act of desire, far from being merely physical, awakens archetypal energies that lie dormant beneath the surface. And yet, many fear this awakening. They prefer performance to presence, fantasy to feeling, because the shadow speaks not in polite words, but in primal, destabilizing truths. It is not possible to experience true erotic depth without first encountering the shadow, for it is the very tension between the known and unknown self that gives the erotic its power. The shadow contains all that the ego has rejected: fear of inadequacy, shame around desire, rage against vulnerability, grief over abandonment. In sexuality, these disowned fragments rise from the unconscious, cloaked in projection, envy, and control. A man may seek domination not from strength, but from fear of being controlled. A woman may chase validation not from erotic fullness, but from a wound that whispers she is not enough. The sexual encounter, if unconscious, becomes a repetition of trauma, a dance not between lovers, but between their shadows. To confront the shadow is to step into the darkness willingly, to allow the body to become a mirror for the psyche. It is to ask, what part of me is seeking this encounter? Is it my soul or my wound? Is it myself or my hunger for escape? When partners dare to bring such questions into the bedroom, intimacy ceases to be an act of consumption and becomes an act of revelation. Erotic depth emerges when two people are brave enough to see not only each other's beauty, but each other's darkness, and to stay present in the face of it. This confrontation is not an intellectual task. It is not solved through analysis alone. It is felt in the tremble of the hands when vulnerability is shown, in the tightening of the chest when old fears arise mid-embrace, in the moment when one chooses not to flee or perform, but to remain fully embodied in the discomfort. The erotic shadow may appear as jealousy, as inhibition, as overcompensation or collapse. Yet if held consciously, it becomes a doorway to greater integration. It demands that both partners move beyond roles and archetypes and touch the raw essence of the other. In Jungian terms, the erotic act becomes a site of individuation, the union of opposites, the sacred and profane, love and lust, giving and receiving, requires that the unconscious be made conscious. The shadow is not the enemy of desire, it is its deep root, the mystery that gives the erotic its gravitational pull. When we cease to flee from it and instead enter into relationship with it, we discover that beneath the fear and shame lies not destruction, but the very fire that makes love transformative. Love that flatters the ego may feel warm, even intoxicating, but it does not transform. It preserves the known, the safe, the surface. True love, soul love, is not always sweet. It is often fierce. It does not merely echo back the idealized self, but reflects the parts hidden in shadow. When love dares to confront the unconscious, it becomes alchemical. It does not simply comfort the psyche, but initiates it. It creates the conditions under which the ego dissolves, the persona cracks, and something ancient and eternal within the individual is summoned to awaken. This kind of love is rare, for it requires not only passion, but presence, not only desire, but discipline. It is not interested in compatibility as much as in evolution. In the alchemical process, the base material, the lead, is subjected to fire, to separation, to dissolution, until it is transmuted into gold. So too in the psyche, love must burn away illusion, separation, projection, and pride. It must reduce the ego's defenses to ash before the inner gold, the self, can emerge. This is not the sentimental love of fairy tales, but the fierce love of the unconscious, the kind that arrives not merely to complete us, but to reveal us to ourselves. A partner who does not challenge us leaves us untouched. A partner who reflects our unhealed places forces us into confrontation with what we would rather ignore. And yet it is through this friction, this psychic tension, that real intimacy is born. Most resist this kind of love, for it threatens the familiar structure of identity. To be loved not for the image we have carefully constructed, but for the self we scarcely know, is terrifying. It requires that we surrender control. But the psyche longs for this surrender, not the collapse of self-worth, but the death of the false self. When someone sees through the mask and does not abandon us, but stays even while naming the illusions we carry, that is the alchemy of soul. Their presence becomes the heat that catalyzes inner change. Their honesty becomes the solvent that dissolves pretense. Their love does not soothe the ego, it exposes it. There is something sacred in being challenged by love. The beloved becomes a symbolic figure, not just a partner, but a vessel of transformation. They become the philosopher's stone, the initiator, the mirror of the unconscious. When two people enter this kind of field together, their union becomes not merely relational, but archetypal. The love they share is not about possessing each other, but about becoming whole. In this crucible, passion deepens into presence, romance into revelation. Each encounter becomes an invitation to shed what is false and to stand naked, psychologically and spiritually, before one another. It is a painful process, but one that purifies. And when the fire is endured, what remains is not the brittle shell of egoic love, but the enduring flame of the self illuminated through other. In the collective unconscious, the feminine has long been cast in the role of the mirror, reflecting the man's ego, nurturing his ambition, offering approval without disturbance. She becomes the vessel for his projections, the canvas upon which he paints his ideal anima, soft, yielding, compliant. But this image is a distortion, a domestication of a far more ancient and potent truth. The archetypal feminine is not passive, she is the initiator. In the alchemy of soul, it is often she who awakens, she who sees, she who calls the man beyond the threshold of his own limitations. She does not merely reflect his light, she tests it, and in that testing she summons his deeper self into being. The passive mirror offers comfort. The feminine initiator offers transformation. She does not worship the mask the man wears, she dismantles it, not with violence, but with presence so deep, so unwavering, that he cannot help but see himself. Her eyes do not flatter, they penetrate. Her words do not soothe the persona, they bypass it, reaching into the very core of his being. This is not rejection, but sacred confrontation. She becomes the priestess of his becoming, the one who holds the gateway between his current self and the self he has yet to embody. And in this role, she is neither mother nor muse, but something far more disruptive and essential, the archetypal feminine force that births not comfort, but consciousness. In the erotic encounter, this distinction becomes most alive. The woman who becomes the initiator does not exist to validate the man's sexual ego. She sees through it. She feels the place where he hides behind performance, and with subtle or explicit gestures, invites him to step out of the illusion. She does not need him to be perfect. She needs him to be real. In her body, in her stillness, in her truth, she communicates the deeper longing, not for conquest, but for communion. This calls the man out of the adolescent seducer and into the archetypal lover. It is not a game, it is a right. The man may resist at first, for the ego does not yield easily. It clings to its defenses, its stories, its roles. But if he senses the purity of her gaze, its lack of manipulation, its refusal to collapse, he may surrender, not to her, but to the part of himself that he has abandoned. This is the moment the feminine becomes the crucible of his transformation, not through dominance, not through emasculation, but through radical presence. She is the fire, not the flame, the night, not the dream. She is the part of life that cannot be possessed, only honored. This feminine is not the echo of his desire. She is the awakening of his soul. In her presence, the false self begins to fall away. The masks, the roles, the bravado, all of it burns in her gaze. And from that fire, if he is ready, the true man emerges, not as an idea, but as an embodied presence. And it is she, not as servant to his myth, but as steward of his truth, who initiates that sacred return. The feminine, when awakened and rooted in her own unconscious depths, ceases to be a projection or ornament of the masculine ego. She becomes the sacred axis of transformation. Her love is not merely emotional, but archetypal, not merely tender, but initiatory. In her presence, the man is called not to perform, but to remember. Through her refusal to worship the mask, she becomes the mirror of his forgotten self, the lost king, the sacred lover, the vessel of depth long buried beneath performance and pride. This is not a personal dynamic, it is a psychic event, the union of opposites, the confrontation with shadow, the death of illusion. These are not romantic gestures, but the movements of the soul toward wholeness. In the fire of this love, both are changed. He steps into the archetype of embodied masculinity, not as domination, but as presence. She takes her place not behind him, nor beneath him, but beside him, as the one who dares to initiate what he has feared to become. It is here, and only here, that Eros fulfills its highest calling, not in pleasure alone, but in the awakening of the self.